Good evening. My name is Phil Griffiths. I am the chair of the Concord Recreation Commission, and I'd like to welcome you here this evening to our information session and public hearing on the replacement of the turf fields at Doug White Fields. On my left are my fellow recreation commissioners. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Matt Boger.
Paul Bone.
Pete Funkhauser. Daniel Rodriguez.
Okay, I think that's going to count as a roll call for officially opening our meeting. We're all here. We have a quorum, so we're ready to go. This evening, what we're going to do is we're going to have about a half an hour. We've scheduled it. We'll be flexible if we need to, of an information session in which we will get a little background context on why we're here this evening and hear from our consultants at Gale Associates about the options moving forward. We'll have some Q&A to make sure we can clarify anything that the consultants have said so we all understand what they're telling us. And then we'll have a public hearing session where anyone can comment on what they've heard and tell us what they think about the issue. So bear with us as we get through that. I'm going to start a little bit just by giving a little bit of context as to how we got here. Much of this will be familiar to many of you, but for those of you who are not familiar intimately with the history of this field and this project, I think it'd be helpful to set some baseline before we turn it over to the consultants to tell us what our options are moving forward. The artificial turfs at Doug White Field on the high school campus provide enormous opportunities for the Concord Carlisle High School sports teams, and they are the most highly used resource for recreation for adult and youth soccer, football, and lacrosse in town. It's our #1 use facility for recreation purposes. The current artificial turf surface was installed by the town on school property 15 years ago through a public-private partnership and was funded primarily by the Friends of Concord Carlisle Fields. It's a nonprofit group that represents the major user groups, including youth and adult soccer, youth lacrosse, and youth football. That current turf is approaching the end of its useful life and needs replacing. Time is of the essence here for replacing the fields. We do not want to lose a season of playing fields if the field has become unplayable. Over the last 15 years, while those fields have been used, the Friends Group has raised additional funds, primarily through fees on the users and participants in the various programs, to cover the anticipated costs of replacing the existing surface with a new artificial turf surface. Those funds were raised specifically for replacing the existing surface with a new artificial turf surface, as this type of surface provides for more playing hours and a longer playing season than would be available with natural grass fields. The town has allocated $100,000 in American Rescue Plan funds for the planning and design phases with the consultant, but there's no town or school district funding allocated for replacement of the fields. The town intends to use the funding provided by the Friends of the Concord Carlisle Fields to replace the existing surface with new artificial turf and has hired a consultant, Gale Associates, to help evaluate the costs and availability of different infill materials, what's known about their environmental and health impacts, possible improvements to the playing surface, and the operations and maintenance considerations of the various options for replacing the turf. There are many residents in town who have expressed concerns about the potential environmental and health impacts of artificial turf fields and the disposal of the existing surface. So the purpose of our meeting tonight is to hear from Gale Associates about the various material and construction options under consideration so that we can all then provide our comment. So with no further ado, that gives us the context. I would also like to recognize that we have a team of people from the town here. Town manager Carrie LaFleur is on vacation, but she's listening to us and she's online. Any and all of this material will be presented to her in its entirety if she misses any, because she is on vacation. We'll allow that. Anthony Insaldi, the chief financial officer, who's sort of the quarterbacking the project here with us. Assistant town manager Jess Porter, and Lee Jackson from the recreation department. It's over there. She can wave. Before we jump in here, commissioners, anybody have any questions before we jump into our presentation from Gale Associates? Okay, this is the meat and potatoes. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Rowan and Caitlin Rogosh from Gale Associates to walk us through the various options that they're presenting to the town.
How's this? Everyone hear me okay? All right, excellent. Shift this a little bit. There we go. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing speak tonight on behalf of this project. For introductions, again, my name is Kyle Rowan. I'm a project manager with Gale Associates. We are a civil engineering and architectural design firm based in Rockland, Massachusetts. I am joined tonight by my colleague, Caitlin Ragosh, over on that side. She's our staff designer. We didn't want to crowd the podium tonight, so I'll be the one up here for this portion of the evening. So jumping right ahead to the next slide here. For context, again, we are Gale Associates. We are here on behalf of the town of Concord and the Concord-Carlisle Regional High School, specifically in regards to replacement of the Doug White Field, which you can see here. This is an aerial of the existing field. It is approximately 200,000 square feet of synthetic turf with crumb rubber and sand infill. That was installed in the 2008-2009 season, and as alluded to, as it's been in the ground for 16 years at this point, it is nearing the end of its serviceable and usable life, and therefore subject to replacement. So getting into replacement, that brings us into 4 primary options of what to do. Option 1 is to replace the synthetic turf in kind with a new turf carpet and SBR crumb rubber infill system, similar to what it has today. Option 2 is to replace, again, in kind with a new turf carpet, crumb rubber and sand infill, as well as the addition of a shock pad, which primarily provides additional shock attenuation for player safety purposes. Option 3 is replacement of the synthetic turf carpet and infill with a non-synthetic infill material, which, just to note, if option 3 is pursued, ultimately that will require a shock pad. So a little bit of clarification. With the crumb rubber infill on option 1, a shock pad is not necessarily required because the infill itself provides sufficient impact attenuation, but option 3, using any of the available organic infill materials, will require the use of a shock pad, which is an additional cost. The 4th and final option would be the full removal of the synthetic turf field in its entirety and conversion to a natural grass field. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start by focusing on the first 3 options. So those are the 3 specifically regarding synthetic turf, using synthetic turf in the replacement. And just to give everyone here an idea and a brief overview of what a synthetic turf system is, this is a cross-section of a couple square feet of a synthetic turf field. What you see here on the top are polyethylene and/or nylon grass fibers, and this system can be infilled with different infill mixes, again, crumb rubber or alternatives. What that white line that you see there is actually the shock pad I was referencing a minute ago. It is a 1/2-inch thick foam pad, again, primarily for impact attenuation purposes. And what this system does provide, the modern synthetic turf system, is a system that operates pretty closely to the feel and performance of natural grass systems, if not better, in that it provides significantly better planarity across the entirety of the field and can be subject to much higher use. Next slide, please. Next here, we have another cross-section there in the middle. On the left, you'll see some of the infill options. So to reiterate again, the one on the top left is crumb rubber infill, which is what is currently on site and what option 1 and 2 would propose for use in the proposed infill. What you see on the bottom left there is just a selection of some of the available alternative organic infills currently on the market. We've chosen these 5 primarily because these are the ones that us as design consultants have experience with in the New England area, so they've been tried and tested, and therefore are what we are comfortable suggesting. What those are made of: we have olive pit, engineered wood fibers, coconut fibers, cork, and walnut shell. These do vary significantly in price, with engineered wood being the cheapest of those 5 options. What you have on the right is just an example of the shock pad. That again is that white line in that cross section. These can come in multiple types of materials. The top right one there is a manufactured polypropylene mix, and the second one, the more multicolored option, is actually recycled foam, primarily from vehicle dashboards, believe it or not. And the last one is actually recycled from existing turf systems. So turf carpets are taken, recycled, and repurposed into a shock pad, which then goes into a new turf field. Next slide, please. So, getting back into our options, I'm going to go back to option 1, which, as a reminder, was replacing the existing field in kind with a new synthetic turf carpet and SBR chrome rubber infill. What you see here is a cross-section of a standard turf field. This is not an exact cross-section of what's out at your site, but it is very similar. Just to give you a brief overview of what's there. You have 2 collector pipes. Those are those circles at the bottom left and bottom right. That's the perimeter drainage system. Above that, you have 8 to 12 inches of base stone, which is just a clean crushed stone. Those little rectangles that you see across the base are actually flat panel drains that run across the base of that field and tie into the collector pipes. And then above that, you have your actual synthetic turf carpet and infill. That's that green layer. So again, option 1 would involve the removal of the existing carpet, regrading of the existing stone base, and placement of a new synthetic turf carpet with chrome rubber. Next slide, please. The next option, option 2, again, just the chrome rubber infill with a shock pad. Only variation there would be, again, pulling up the existing turf, fine grading the existing stone, placing a shock pad, and then placing the turf with chrome rubber infill. Next slide. Option 3, cross-section looks the same, scope of work and construction pretty much looks the same, removal of the existing turf system, placing of a shock pad, placing of the new synthetic turf, and then in that turf would go one of the alternative infill non-synthetic products. Next slide. Option 4 would be converting the existing field back to natural grass. This would by far be the most extensive construction operation of the 4 options. This would require removal of the existing turf carpet and infill, removal of that 8 to 12 inch stone base, removal of all of those drainage components that you saw in the previous cross sections, and then reinstallation of new fill to get it up to a certain grade, the proposed subgrade, and then installation of a drainage layer, which is that gray layer you see in between, new drainage infrastructure being placed within that layer, and then on top you have your root zone mix, which is a loam and either seed or sod. Next option, or next slide. So now that we have the 4 options kind of laid out, hopefully that's clear enough for everyone. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you in a short amount of time, but next thing I want to go through general comparisons. No problem. I think go back a couple. So just going through general comparisons of synthetic versus natural grass. So next slide. So again, options 1 through 3, synthetic. Option 4, converting to natural grass. So talking about synthetic versus natural grass, one of the biggest cost differences you see over time is annual maintenance. So the annual maintenance of a typical rectangular grass field, I want to highlight at this field we actually have 2 of those side by side, but the pricing we see here is specific to one rectangular grass field. That comes out to about $30,000 a year for adequate maintenance with those line items you see there, from mowing to watering, irrigation, fertilizer, aeration, top dressing, so on and so forth. To do this correctly, typically requires 3 to 5 part-time or full-time staff, whereas synthetic turf requires fewer staff, 1 to 2 at most, and the actual maintenance operations are limited to routine and deep grooming, which is basically just driving over the turf system with a groomer. That comes out to a lower number of about $4,000 to $7,000 per year for a rectangular turf field, a single field. Something else to highlight on this slide is what you see there. Uses can increase by 300% with a synthetic turf field. And that really is the selling point and the purpose behind installing synthetic turf fields to begin with and replacing them in kind, is that you get 3 times, if not more, use out of them. Next slide, please. So for this specific project, so again, this is focusing on both fields back to back. Current schematic design level estimated cost of construction for those 4 options are as you see here. For replacement in kind with the SBR crumb rubber infill and no shock pad, that's 1.3 million. For that replacement with a shock pad, that bumps it up to 1.5. For reference, shock pads are about $100,000 per rectangular field. Option 3, which would be the synthetic turf with a non-synthetic infill option, would bump us up to 1.6 million. And that little asterisk you see there is to clarify that, as I noted, there are a lot of alternative synthetic or non-synthetic infills on the market. They vary widely in cost. So that cost, depending on what was selected, could jump anywhere from 1.6 to 2.1 million. Option 4, we have conversion to a natural grass field. The construction estimate for that is 1.8 million. And again, specific to this project, the bulk of that cost is due to the fact that there is an existing field here, and the majority of that infrastructure will need to be removed and disposed of, and new fill will need to be brought in. Next slide. So hours of use comparison. Again, this is sort of the primary separator between synthetic fields and natural grass fields. A well-maintained natural grass field with lights can typically sustain about 250 uses per year, if you consider use a full game or match. That use is about, again, 250 per year before it would require a rest period of up to 2 months. Alternatively, synthetic turf fields, particularly those with lights that are not limited by daytime, nighttime, can sustain a minimum of 750 uses per year. So 3 times more, if not more than that. Some items to think about in replacing Doug White Field with a natural grass field. Doug White has been a synthetic turf field for 16 years now. Those uses are fully programmed in, so if it was converted and therefore the uses were dropped from that 750 to 250, those uses would have to go somewhere else, and that would apply use pressure to the other fields throughout town. One other item of note here is just due to its all-weather surface, synthetic turf fields are not susceptible to late fall and early spring mud season conditions, so you do hypothetically have a longer season. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly go through pros and cons of all those 4 options that we've listed. Next slide. So pros of the crumb rubber infill, so in parentheses up there, again, this is options 1 and 2. It is the most economical choice. This is a very common infill that's been installed and used in the Northeast for 30 years now. It is readily available, provides sufficient shock attenuation and player safety on its own. And another important note is this is by far the most widely studied infill of everything that's available on the market now. One thing which I'll touch on more later is the EPA did just finalize and publish a study specific to crumb rubber infill synthetic turf fields. It's a 5-year study they just concluded in April of this past year. And the town does have that. We've made that available to them, so that should be available to all. Next slide, please. Cons of SBR infill: perceived health and safety concerns relative to the material itself, perceived environmental concerns, again, relative to the SBR crumb rubber, as well as heat impact. These fields do heat up, more so than natural grass would. I would like to point out that that is mostly due to solar radiation, so as soon as the sun goes behind the clouds or the sun sets, that heat dissipates pretty quickly, a lot faster than a parking lot does. It doesn't retain, but it does have the ability to heat up more than natural grass does. Pros of option 3. So again, this is synthetic turf carpet, but with a non-synthetic infill. These infills are manufactured from naturally occurring materials. So again, some of those options would be cork, coconut husk, walnut shell, or engineered wood. They're more organic in color and texture, of course, and more closely imitate a natural grass field. And some materials, depending on which one is chosen, can absorb water, obviously better than SBR rubber would, and therefore can result in a cooler field due to evapotranspiration. And one other added benefit, again, contingent on the actual one selected, is it can be used for soil amendments at the end of its useful life. Next slide. Cons of non-synthetic infill, again, option 3. They may require replenishing from time to time, so additional infill being brought in if some of it has broken down. They have a higher tendency to freeze because of that ability to hold moisture, which again can impact use on the shoulder seasons. And in terms of costs, as we saw before, they can add additionally approximately $50,000 to $200,000 per field in addition to the additional 100,000 that would be needed for the shock pad. And that's for one rectangular field, so we double that in the case of this project. Next slide, please. Pros of natural grass, obviously more closely resembles natural conditions. It is a natural product. There are perceived environmental benefits associated with that, of course, relative to going with a or with a synthetic product. They are non-permanent, so a natural grass field would, of course, be easier to redevelop later on feasibly, and it does not ultimately require replacement, as we are currently doing for the existing field 16 years after its original installation. Next slide, please. Cons of natural grass. So in this particular instance with this field, being that it is an existing system, it would require the full removal of that subsurface drainage system and stone base. It would require the design and installation of a new irrigation system. It may require fertilization, increased annual maintenance costs, as we discussed on those previous slides. Depending on whether seed or sod is utilized, sod is the more expensive option. It would require a full growing season after installation prior to opening it up for use. And that decreased usage that we talked about before, from about 750 uses per year down to 250. Next slide. So, all that said, again, a lot of information. I'm going to kind of go back to focusing on the synthetic turf options 1 through 3 here. So, advertised synthetic turf advantages, kind of already touched on some of these. Low maintenance, lower overall lifetime costs per use when you factor in that 250 to 750. Permanent lines and markings, not requiring consistent repainting after storms. Nearly all weather use, of course, so long as the weather's acceptable for playing in to begin with. The field itself should be able to handle any weather conditions. High utilization, which again is that added use, as well as revenue opportunities, actually renting out the fields to other organizations for a fee. Next slide. Just for perspective here, we wanted to show some photos of past turf replacement projects that Gale Associates has been involved in. Going in order here, from top left, you have the initial protection of the surrounding track or pavement or materials as needed. Step 2 would be the removal of the existing turf and infill. Step 3, top right, is the laser grading of the existing base stone. So again, no significant amount of new stone is imported. It's just regrading what is already there. The fourth picture on the bottom left would be the placement of the shock pad, if that is required for the project design. And then the last 2 photos on the bottom right is the actual laydown of the turf itself, which is then infilled with whatever infill material is chosen and groomed and ready for use. Next slide. So, crumb rubber, SBR crumb rubber, what we know, like I alluded to before, the EPA came out with a comprehensive report in April 2024, 5-year study focused on player safety and health specific to crumb rubber synthetic turf fields. Key findings from that were, of course, as expected with the synthetic material, there are a range of chemicals within the material. However, air emissions of those organic chemicals is low. Bioaccessibility of the metals associated with that material are low, and bacteria levels are similar to those measured in background soils of natural grass playing fields. So the bottom sentence there is one of the conclusion sentences and or paragraphs in that report, which states no significant difference in the exposure from chemicals found between players who play on synthetic turf fields that use crumb rubber infill and those who played on grass fields. Next slide, please. PFAS, this is another topic that not just specific to synthetic turf fields, this is becoming an issue across all consumer products, quite frankly. In addition to that, it is measurable in water, soil, air, and food. The turf industry has been aware of this issue for some time now. They're one of the first to have acknowledged it, and leading turf manufacturers now, due to that awareness, are able to certify that PFAS is not intentionally added in their products. Of the fields that we've worked on as consultants, we have several letters to date in the past few years specific to that, as requested by us or the owner. in terms of if a town is to go forward with turf installation, there are monitoring options specific to PFAS, which Gale specifically has experience with in the last couple of years. The primary option here is actual testing of all of the materials that will be brought to site, so the sand infill, crumb rubber infill, the synthetic turf carpet itself, and the shock pad. Those can be tested for PFAS before they actually leave the plant, before they leave and get shipped, because doing so afterwards in shipping, in placement, there's risk for contamination, but we do have experience getting third-party testing prior to shipment. There is a new EPA published method, 1633, which again also came out in April of last year by chance, which can be utilized to test solids. That is a test that was not available until very recently. Next slide, please. Turf system, disposal, and recycling. This is something that's becoming far more prevalent in the industry. Conventional landfill disposal is obviously less and less popular, and sometimes outright banned by the local municipalities. So there is a growing market in response to that for recycling and or repurposing of both the infill and turf carpet itself. We have experience including these recycling requirements in bid documents, so before the project even goes into construction, and the actual bid documents itself, it will require that the existing material is recycled and that a chain of custody certification is provided to prove that it was. Next slide, please. So in terms of what recycling actually looks like today, I won't go through the details. Long story short, for the most part, it's repurposing, right? So the actual carpet and infill, depending on the infill itself, can be chopped, pelletized, and extruded into other products. Some of the primary uses we see to date are plastic lumber, shock pads, again, as we looked at before, benches, that sort of synthetic decking you sometimes see, a lot of those applications. So again, it's mostly repurposing at this point, actual cradle-to-cradle recycling, so taking an existing turf field material, recycling that, and turning it back into turf. It is coming to market in 2025, 2026. We're following this closely. Not quite available yet, but at the moment, full repurposing is an available option. Next slide. That is it.
Kyle, thank you. That was a lot of information, but very, very informative. What I'd like to do now for the rest of this evening is offer a chance for clarifying questions of the consultants to make sure we understood what was presented, if there are any specific details that we want to make sure we all understand. Then we'll go to a comment section where people can provide opinions related to that. But I wanted to give first any of our commissioners a chance to ask questions of Kyle, clarifying what was presented.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Great presentation. Do your cost estimates include the cost of disposal recycling of the current field?
Yes.
And what percentage of that cost? What roughly, how much of the overall cost is
I don't have the
recycling?
estimate in front of me. I believe it's around 50 cents per square foot.
Okay. Is that 20% of that cost? Or I don't have my calculator here.
I don't want to say without that estimate in front of me either. It's probably in the $50,000 to $100,000 range for that amount of turf.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Pete, you go ahead. So we're going to have commissioners, and then we'll come back out to other folks. Pete?
The next to last slide, can you put it up, please?
Is that the one?
Different polymers in the carpet are not easily recycled. What does that mean?
That just means in terms of recycling back into an actual turf product. So again, everything in the carpet and the infill, if we're using SPR rubber or a non-synthetic as an example, can be repurposed.
Can be, okay.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks again for the presentation. A couple questions. So the shock pad, I'm wondering the depth, and if there's different depths that you could put, and my assumption is that helps the body parts who are running up and down that. Second of all, I thought there was a 30-year use for one of them. I wanted to see if that was correct. I saw that on the slides because it seems like we have a 15-year use that's come out, so that's doubling the use size. And then there was a third option that the prices range from 1.6 to 2.1. And my assumption is it's the fill. If you could just tell us what, your estimate at 1.6 is, what does that fill to the 2.1?
So first question, the shock pad, the primary use for that, if you're utilizing the SBR crumb rubber, the reason to add a shock pad would just to provide additional shock attenuation. These fields are measured for impact attenuation and safety. They have to meet certain measurements and certain requirements to be acceptable for play. Adding that shock pad, while not necessarily required for an SBR field, does provide an additional buffer and, arguably helps lengthen the timeline, the life cycle of the field.
Would there be value of having a more deep shock pad? I'm interested in how you came to the whatever inch it is.
The
Why
half
can't we
inch,
double-
no, understood. The half inch is what's typically manufactured. There are thicker ones, but it's a fine balance. You can't get too thick because you actually can't have a field that's too soft. That creates its own safety hazards. We want impact attenuation, but you want a firm field for player movement and ball movement to most closely mimic a natural grass field. So that is why the half inch is what is typically specified. Question 2, you'll have to remind me of.
Yeah, I thought I said there was, on one of the sides it said a 30-year use.
I don't think so.
Okay.
The warranties have increased slightly over the years of a lot of these products. Shock pads, I believe, are a 10-year, or actually shock pads are 20-year warranties. The turf carpet itself varies depending on manufacturer between 8 and 12 years at this point.
12 years, okay. Yeah, I'm happy, I know you're backing up on that. And the second one was just the different prices.
Yep.
From 1.6 to 1.
So I don't have those details necessarily in front of me, but the long and short of it is there are a lot of infill options, alternative infill options. There are both synthetic and non-synthetic options, numbering in the tens. Those non-synthetic options, which are the ones we were talking about in option 3 and what that price is related to, they range in price significantly. So the cheapest option, again, would bring you in at 1.6. That is the engineered wood fibers. So across 200,000 square feet, that total would come out to 1.6, whereas the most expensive of those options brings you to 2.1. In between that falls the rest of them.
And do you have a recommended one? Is there one that you like better, the cork or the whatever?
We have the most experience with the cheapest option, which is the engineered wood fiber. The actual, I won't say the actual product name, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that or not, but that is what we have the most experience with in the New England area, installing in separate from crumb rubber infill.
Sure, and so this is, you've got 30 years of experience with on the slide, no?
Oh,
performance
that,
plus
no. So that, I guess the wording isn't perfect there. That is just, these fields have been installed and in use in New England for 30 years. So these systems, that's not to say a single field has been here for 30 years, but this system of infill, crumb rubber, and synthetic turf has been around for 3 decades.
Thank you for going that, appreciate it.
Phil, one more. How many different manufacturers are there of the different products? Is there
There's
a big choice?
There's a lot of folks in the game these days.
There are.
Yeah. I would say in this area, you're probably talking about 5 to 10.
For each of those options?
No, well, each of the options, the engineered wood fiber, for example, that's actually only one manufacturer at this point. A lot of them patent their product. So the cork and the coconut is another manufacturer, so on and so forth. It's a bit of an interesting layout of companies.
So I assume the largest number of options for manufacturers is number 1, option number 1.
That is very much the case, yes.
Thank you.
Those be local coconuts? No?
With a lining.
I got you.
Yeah, I have a question. So you said that replacing the turf with grass would take like a season. How long would it take the other options, like the option 1, 3?
So options 1 through 3, which would just be replacing in kind or with synthetic turf and one of the available infills, those would all take place over the same timeline. For example, it could go into construction as soon as June or July of this year, with a target date of completion in mid-September, early October, and the day that it's done, it's ready for use. As soon as it's passed that impact attenuation testing and been signed off on by the engineer of record, it's good to go. So that's about a 3-4 month construction window for options 1 through 3. Option 4, really the construction window itself is similar in getting the field leveled out, getting it seeded, but if seed is what's used, you need to let that grow for an entire season. So that entire fall, it wouldn't be available for use until the spring. If you use sod, it's a shorter window, but say that sod goes down in October, you still need to let it sit for a month to actually take into the root zone below before playing on it heavily. So most likely losing the fall season in both scenarios, seed or sod.
My other question would be, because there was something about availability of the synthetic, and are there non-synthetic options maybe not available, or we have to maybe wait more for them, or?
It depends. They'll have different lead times. Again, there's so many options at this point, varying prices, varying manufacturers, therefore varying lead times. The engineered wood fiber, again, is pretty readily available. That's made in the United States down in Georgia. SPR, chrome rubber, very readily available. And the other ones, we'd have to look into more as to what their actual lead times are.
So when they get when it's recycled, where does it go? So you say we're going to recycle it. So where does it
So
end up?
part of a public project, obviously, in terms of specifications, we can't tell them exactly what it is repurposed into. We can't tell it exactly what recycling plant it goes to. We can't, same reason we can't say you need to use this contractor, you need to use this manufacturer. What we have are design specifications that, in terms of recycling, will clarify that this product needs to be 100% repurposed. And therefore, the contractor will take that, that'll be a part of their bid price, and then during the actual demolition and construction phase, they would need to provide chain of custody evidence and certifications that that product did, in fact, go to a repurposing plant.
Awesome. Sorry. Thank you for that clarification. I think you said that. And then lastly, the EPA report. I haven't read that yet. What's the overall theme of said report?
That sentence that I had on the slide, which I don't know off the top of my head, is probably the best synopsis of it. That report is certainly a worthwhile read for anyone with concerns specific to crumb rubber and synthetic turf. Again, 5-year study, EPA, on the most studied infill available. The synopsis was that the chemical exposure, no significant difference in the exposure from chemicals found between players who played on synthetic turf fields that used crumb rubber infill and those who played on grass fields. Something I think that's important just to specify about natural grass fields is, yes, it is a natural product, but soils and natural grass are also subject to contamination via rain, weather, usage, so on and so forth. So that's a factor to consider.
Any other questions, Commissioners? I'd like to ask anybody here participating has a clarifying question. We'll ask some clarifying questions, then we'll come back to actually ask for comments. But if anyone would raise your hand and go to the mic and let us know who you are and ask your clarifying question, please.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. Thank you for your presentation. I want to make sure that everyone knows that we believe everyone has good intentions and nobody's evil on any kinds of sides. However, can you give me a specific example of a specific place that it is possible to take the used turf this time? Number one. Number two, what is the cost of the disposal part and who would bear it? And number three, did the EPA studies include longitudinal studies of set incidences of asthma, and it couldn't do a cancer because there hasn't been enough time for that. And lead. I noticed that the slide did not say no problem for the chemicals.
Thank you. I will ask, Kyle can answer what he can now. If there are questions that he can't answer, we will ask the consultants to get back to us with some more information. So Kyle, if you can answer, anything you can answer now would be great.
Yep.
And we'll ask you to, reply others.
So question one is the name of an actual specific location for a recycling or repurposing plant. I do not know those names off the top of my head. That is something we can very easily get back to this commission with very quickly.
Are there any in Massachusetts?
I can't say for sure right now, but we will provide a list of plants that we have seen utilized in past projects.
You don't know if there are any in Massachusetts?
I think he's answered the question. We don't know where they are. They'll get back to us with a list of them. This is the construction companies that will provide that, the people who do the installation and maintenance. We'll get that information. We'll get that question answered. Kyle, if you have any more comment on the EPA study, that's not your area of expertise. I think we can all read what's in the study.
That's more or less our comment. We are design engineers of record. We are not toxicologists. We provide the EPA study because, in our opinion, that is the best available, most comprehensive study to date, and we prefer to let that study speak for itself and be open to the public interpretation.
Thank you. And we'll get back. We'll get the answers and provide them back as best we can. Anyone else have any clarifying questions as opposed to comments?
Oh, sorry, yes. So the cost of recycling will be included in the bid specification requirements, and therefore the cost of recycling will be included in the bid for the project itself. So whoever is paying for the project pays for that recycling.
Seth.
Seth Vandersaw, 181 Alcott Road. Kyle, thank you. Great presentation. Two quick questions. The non-synthetic infill, because it can retain water, is mold a concern? Have you ever seen that in your experience?
I have not personally seen it, and again, with the product that we are most familiar with in the Northeast area, that engineered wood fiber, it is our understanding mold is no more of a problem than it would be on a natural soil field, but it is not an issue.
And then on the SBR, the crumb rubber infill, just the infill or infill with the shock pad, which one most accurately mimics turf, natural grass? The
Natural
shock
grass?
pad?
Probably with the shock pad. It depends on the natural grass field, but again, when possible, we do try to include shock pads at this point. It's a technology that's progressed a long way, and it does provide that additional level of impact attenuation. And
So the impact attenuation is adequate without the shock pad, but more closely mimics turf or natural grass with the shock pad?
that's a fair interpretation.
Thank you.
Charles Parker had a question.
Hi, Charlie Parker, 105 Chestnut Street. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, the chain of custody, I think, is a great offer that you have. But I guess on the determination of whether there's a impact on the water supply, is that part of the analysis that you do? I didn't see anything about wells or water supply or anything of that sort. Now, PFAS obviously is a concern. It's a concern that has been, put forth by EPA. There's all kinds of new water testing standards, and the Concord might be expending quite a bit of money on filtration, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What do you include in this process in the way of analytics regarding the risk of water contamination and contamination to our wells? Now, that may be a town requirement, that may be something the town has to do, but it's certainly a risk that needs to be dealt with. Now, I don't know where that gets figured in, whether the town sorts that out and hires an independent company to do that and attaches that onto the bill for the job or what, but it's something that needs to be addressed, and maybe you can comment on what you've done for other towns.
So with this particular location, we are not within a wellhead, drinking water wellhead protection area or drinking water protection district. So that right there, it doesn't change what is done in terms of design or construction, but I think it's an important context as to where this field is actually located. And aside from that, really, I think I refer back to the studies that we have provided to the town. I think it's best that, you know, any and all information relative to these products and their potential impacts is best interpreted through those studies rather than coming directly from us.
Maybe the town should comment on that, you know, it's fine for that.
Yeah, we'll, Alan Cathcart from Public Works here. I don't know if he has any
Okay, all right.
comment or any observation he wants to say in response to that.
Well, we can maybe take Alan when I finish up my little
Okay.
list. Now, specifications for procurement, some sort of notion of PFAS-free. I assume that you do something along those lines. You basically say, well, we're going to test the chemicals in a certain way, we're going to test the materials in a certain way, and we're going to come up with some sort of declaration that, you know, either it meets certain testing requirements or it doesn't, or we ran these tests and this is what it all means, and so forth and so on. And there's also some issues associated with liability. You know, you've got to make sure we all understand what we're getting ourselves into with respect to the toxicity of the materials that are going to go down on that field. I'm not saying that, you know, artificial turf is good or bad. I'm just saying that there is risk. We know there is risk here. And I'm wondering how you quantify that and how that gets written down on a piece of paper and how that gets declared and how that gets warranted and how that gets to be something that you stand behind and something that the manufacturer stands behind as something that kind of we can count on going forward. I don't know how you're going to answer these questions. It's kind of a complicated one, but I don't want to take up the whole meeting.
Yeah, no, I think again, Kyle, if there's something you can specifically answer that, the rest of those we will respond with, you know, in consultation with the consultants to get it even more confusing. But those are legitimate questions that we will endeavor to find an answer for you. But Kyle can say what he's allowed to.
Thank you.
Well, now PFAS is a very constrained, can be a very constrained set of tests. And there's thousands of potential compounds that are forever chemicals. And we ought to be careful when we go forward with this that we are fully transparent with the town about what the risks are of all this other stuff that may not be tested. And, you know, I guess, you know, that's kind of the problem here, or the challenge here, is that we understand what we're getting into before we get into it. And I assume we're close to getting into it, but until we sign the agreement to actually proceed with the contract with whoever's going to do the work, so it's still an open question. Now, I got a related question to that. Do you select the manufacturers before how do you deal with the differences between manufacturers in terms of the PFAS content and the rules because once you go to open bid, then it's kind of
right. And this is due to this being Massachusetts, and we're subject to public bidding laws. You can't say we need manufacturer A or we want general contractor A.
right.
What we do is we provide construction specifications in the bidding documents that set parameters for what, you know, these products need to meet, performance parameters, design parameters, as well as experience parameters for the contractors. They need to have previously done this type of work.
Okay, so we should see all those parameters and all those bid specifications before we go to bid. We should see those. The public should see those because that's what we're going to be stuck with. So the field is going to consist of, at a minimum, the lowest level of test performance in that sort of set of parameters that you put forth, right?
Okay.
You get
Right.
me, right?
Right.
So we should understand what those are. Is that fair?
Thank you, Charlie. We'll talk with the team about the procurement process and other things they're going.
I guess the only other question I have is on the EPA thing about crumb rubber. That sounded just didn't sound right. You know, that geez, crumb rubber, ground up tires with all the chemicals that we have in tires, and it's the same as you know, playing on a field that's natural grass, this chemical exposure.
That's,
It'd be good to see the rest of that test, what they tested.
we can forward you the study.
What the
That's,
test didn't say, and, you know, this kind of stuff.
you can read it as well, sir. That's not theirs to answer. The EPA is the, you know, the premier science organization that's doing what it can, and I'm glad they got it out in April 2024. Sorry, political comments aside. Does anybody else have any clarification questions? And then we'll turn over to actually giving an opportunity for specific comment.
I have a question about the research on chemical exposure. The federal research that I read measured in a handful of players urine concentrations of 1 or 2 chemicals before playing soccer or whatever game it was, and after. And there was basically minimal difference, but it was only a couple of chemicals. Can you tell me more about how many people were in that study and what they tested for?
That's not their job. That's the EPA's study. That's not our consultant's
well, yes, but he should know
responsibility.
what the EPA study was, you know, besides it.
we will-
He needs to know what was in it.
I'm sure he's read it, but he's a consultant that does the construction and operations for us, not the
Perhaps the
EPA.
committee could find the answer to that question.
None of us are toxicologists. We can provide the study from the EPA. It's available online. Anyone can read it, and you can give us specific comments on that study if you care to. But we're not in a position to answer questions about the EPA's research.
Well, I think chemical exposure is important.
Does anybody else have any other clarifying questions? There was one more in the back, and then we'll go to comment.
Phil?
Yeah, hi, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. You used in your presentation a construction concept for a grass field, which is we have to tear up the whole crushed stone layer, put in a new one that meets the need, and then we can now put, you know, enough fill and then the grass. In the process of doing the middle school project, there was a separate conversation about how are they going to construct the fields. They specified that they needed a 12-inch crushed stone layer with drainage, and then they would put fill and then finally, you know, sod. I think they're either sod or they'll loam it. Why is the underlayment that's there now not acceptable for that crushed stone layer?
From a design perspective, the underlayment that exists with the current field is not what we propose when we reconstruct a new grass field. When we build one, we want to build the field to the best performance standards we can. We want it to function properly and last. To do so, it is very much our opinion that we would build it the way we know how to.
So I guess the question, I guess the question is the fines of the crushed stone different for a natural turf field than for the synthetic field? So you have to take away all of that because it's too fine or it's not big, you know?
If you saw in the cross section in that presentation, we do not use a 12-inch layer of crushed stone. We use common fill for the most part, and within that you have a smaller, thinner layer, 1 to 2 inches of finer crushed stone, which is the drainage layer, which has the flat panel drains, slotted drains in it, and then the loam and seed above that.
I fully appreciate that. I argued for a 6-inch layer of crushed stone on the middle school project.
Thank you. I don't know if there's anybody, I think, are there any other specific clarifying questions, or did we, go ahead, we'll do one more and then we'll let Alan, if he wanted to say something about the water question.
Yeah, hi, Cameron McKennett, 64 Nut Meadow Crossing. So I am a member of the select board, but speaking for myself here. So just quickly, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was extremely informative, and I think you did a great job of laying out the options. So with regards to the 3 turf options that would, I think, as I understand it, be funded by the Friends of CC Fields, I think it would be great, you've shown the price comparisons, and I just think it would also be great to understand pretty clearly, like in a table, like the prevalence. So how often are those 3 choices used, like amongst sort of different fields, other fields that you've seen, just as examples? I think also just the performance, like just clarifying kind of the performance across those 3 options. And then also sort of what it means in terms of duration. So for those three options, what is sort of the typical duration? So I don't know that you need to answer it right now, but just to me, it feels like a table like that would really sort of be able to show, again, sort of price as well as prevalence, performance, and duration, I think would give a nice comparison across those choices.
So specifically fields, probably in the New England area that have used some of those
Yeah,
options.
yeah, just because was a little unclear. Like, say, hey, do people normally do the pad along with the infill, or is that sort of like an abnormal thing? And like, what is giving you sort of the best performance? And is there a change in duration if you're using the organic infill option, for example, versus the pad versus the?
Yeah, we can provide more detail on that. Just for references and as a reminder, all of the organic infill options, no matter which of the many available you choose, requires a shock pad to give you that impact attenuation.
Yeah, right.
But in terms of what's used most frequently, again, that engineered wood fiber is what we believe is the most frequently used alternative in the New England area.
In that option, right.
That specific infill material, but we can dig around and see if we can get a better feel for other fields in the area.
Thank you. Liz, last question, and then we're going to go to
Joel
Alan and Paul.
134 Southfield Road. I think this is a yes or no. The question about recycling the existing field, that has to be done regardless of which option we go with, 1, 2, 3, 4, correct?
Assuming that's what the town wants to do, that's what we would put in our bid specifications.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Paul Bohm had a question.
Yeah, and it's clarifying, I think, on PFAS. I think you mentioned that the product itself is going to be measured for PFAS, and the manufacturers have to report that as part of, is that what you said?
They, at this point, due to the fact this has been going on for a few years, they do provide letters, certifications stating there is no intentionally added PFAS in their manufacturing process or products.
Right.
No one can say PFAS-free for legal reasons, but we can at least get that.
But they could provide information on how that was determined, how they tested that?
Yes, and we can require them to provide testing information again after manufacturing before it leaves the plant.
That'd be helpful, thank you.
We have one question online from Board Selectman Mark Howell. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just took me a minute to get on. I had a question about the usage of the field as it's been up until now. Do we know how many? I know there was a reference to programmed uses someplace between 250 and 750. Do we know what the Doug White Field's usage actually is historically?
We can calculate that for you. I don't think we have it exactly here, but we can calculate with the Friends of the Concord Carlisle Field who have the most permanent hours. We can calculate that out and figure that out and get that information to you.
I think it'd be useful just to understand sort of how heavily, I assume it's not 750 and it's probably more than 250, but it'd be interesting to know what it is. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. On that note, thank you, Kyle. Thank you very much. That was super informative. We're going to ask Alan Cathcart from Public Works if he had anything he wanted to add on the water supply related question or anything else.
This is for clarification. The fields are within the zone 2 of the Hugh Cargill well, just important to know that. But equally important, I'll use this as a public service announcement, PFAS is everywhere. And we have risks all over the place. Every septic system is a risk. So be mindful of that. We're talking about parts per trillion. So we have to be, mindful of what individuals do. The manufacturers know what's in it, but you don't know what's in a lot of the products that you're using that end up in our groundwater. I will say Hugh Cargill is already slated for treatment anyway. The fact is Hugh Cargill has a well, has a road right in front of it. It's also subjected to septic system influences and that sort of thing. So just be mindful of that. We put it in context, but I'm a little challenged with PFAS. Sort of, it's a weapon across the world, and so I'm not an advocate for new sources, but I also think we have to put it in perspective where there are a lot of sources out there. So,
Thank you, Alan. Okay, if there's no other questions, I think we will sort of thank our consultants. They're going to stay here for the evening if there are any questions that we need to ask them. But the idea would be, we've got a set of questions that we will get from them, answers from them as best we can, and let that send that back out to the public. But now I think what we'll do is we'll open up the discussion for specific public comment. Just before we do that, I just want to make a note. This is an unusual project that's done by a public-private partnership with the town. The town managers asked the Recreation Commission to provide the forum for this discussion. We're not a decision-making body here. We're collecting this information, and then we'll give our thoughts about it back to the town manager. She is online listening to all of this as well. But we're here to help facilitate that process of collecting all of the information. Yes, one last question.
At the end of, assuming we do go with artificial turf, at the end of this next life of this turf, who pays for that replacement? Is there funds in the, the CCF play for future replacements?
I'm sure one of the issues that we will look at the agreement with the Friends of Concord Carlisle Fields, and we can address that in any renegotiation of that agreement as it comes up.
And what if there's nowhere to dispose of it then?
I can't predict what's going to happen in 15 years. None of us can. So I will.
Well, we need to know where it's disposed of now, because I heard here that there's nowhere in Massachusetts that will take it.
We don't know the answer to that question. We'll get back to people that answer that question. So on that note, I'd like to ask a couple of people to make the first comments. I've asked the school district, Tracy Morano is here to comment on behalf of the school district on their thoughts towards this process.
Great. Thank you. Tracy Morano, 39 Partridge Lane. I'm a member of the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of Julie Viola, the chair of the Regional School Committee, who could not be here tonight and asked me to come in her place. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight for the importance of replacing the Doug White playing fields at CCHS with turf. The school committee has not discussed specifics of this in a public meeting, so we're deferring to the existing agreement between the town and the regional school district. We're in support of the town of Concord moving forward with the plan to replace the Doug White turf fields with turf. After reading the contract between the town of Concord and the regional school district, especially section 22, alterations and improvements, the operational pressures of scheduling during all kinds of field replacements, as well as the turf quality reports, it is in the best interest from an operational athlete safety standpoint and overall feasibility to move forward with turf for turf replacement. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continued collaboration as we work to provide the best resources for our schools and community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I'd now like to invite Seth Vandersway from the Friends of Concord Carlisle Fields for a comment.
Thanks, Phil. Seth Vandersway, 181 Alcott Road. Thank you, Phil, the Rec Commission, for hosting this session and being such an integral part of the process, and certainly thank you to Gale and Associates for a comprehensive view of the options. It was really well done. I'm here as the president of the Friends of CC Fields, which, as Phil mentioned, is a nonprofit organization that represents the Concord Carlisle youth soccer, youth lacrosse, youth football, and adult soccer programs. As Phil mentioned as well, the Friends Group was created when the original turf field was installed in order to represent the interests of those four groups and to collect the necessary money over the past 15 years to fund this eventual replacement. And we haven't finalized any agreement on what future replacement looks like and who would pay for that, but our expectation is that those groups would continue to raise funds through our regular fees in order to build coffers for the eventual replacement of the new turf field. Personally, along with representing the Friends of CC playing fields, I speak tonight also as a parent, as a coach, and as the president of the Concord Carlisle Youth Soccer Organization. My focus here with my comments is really on availability and playability as the town evaluates options. We live in a tough climate, as Gale and Associates has pointed out, and as Phil mentioned, the Doug White fields are the most used fields in our town. We want to ensure that the surface we choose for these fields allows us to at least maintain current usage, if not increase usage for our youth and adult athletes. We have thousands of athletes using these fields for well over 1,000 hours each year. We estimate roughly at least 25 weeks of usage, 5 hours during the weekdays, 8 hours during the weekend days, so both Saturday and Sunday, putting us in the neighborhood of 1,500 hours of usage during the year. It includes the youth sports that I mentioned, but also the boys and girls high school soccer and lacrosse teams, and then they've also been used as a backup for high school field hockey and football as well. And if they were converted to natural grass, so Gale and Associates had good data here in terms of how much usage would degrade. Based on our usage, we estimate that we'd lose over 300 hours of playing time in the shoulder seasons, March and November, December, because of weather-related issues. Then during the heart of spring and fall seasons, we estimate at least a 30% reduction in availability due to weather issues and the need to rest grass to keep them healthy and playable, so another 300 hours potentially lost of usage. Add to that, while turf fields are not regularly used in the heart of winter by our programs, they're still available, whereas grass often is frozen, covered in snow, or both. And then in terms of playability, as I said, the fields are used for championship level play for both soccer and lacrosse and need to be high quality, consistent services. I give the DPW and Alan and his team a ton of credit. They do an outstanding job on our grass fields, but we know it would be incredibly costly, time consuming, and ultimately maybe not even feasible, given the location and the usage to maintain a grass playing service at the level it's required. Our sports teams have been blessed with the playability of the current turf surfaces, and we know that a high-quality artificial turf will be the most consistently playable surface going forward. The turf that was installed at Doug White Field 17 years ago, it's been a boon to our town's sports programs. We have more kids playing sports in Concord and Carlisle than ever before. That's amazing, and these fields are a big part of that. The Friends of CC Fields wants to ensure that these fields remain highly available to our user groups and to the high school teams that use them, and we want to ensure that every team using them enjoys a high-quality, consistent service that allows for an amazing experience. So thank you again to the town, the Rec Commission, and to Gale and Associates for the thoughtful work on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And sort of a last invitation on behalf of the Town Climate Action Committee. Charlie, I don't know if you have additional comments other than your questions that you wanted to make. And then we'll open up to the general public. But if the Climate Action Committee has any additional comments they want to make. Janet, if you want, whoever would like to do that.
I'm not sure I have a whole lot more comments. I made a lot of comments already. I kind of slipped them in under the clarification
Noted.
question section. But no, I think it was a very good presentation. Thank you very much for doing that. And I guess my sense of the situation is that we're most likely going to proceed with the turf strategy because of the playability, hours of use, evening use, and so forth. So I'm kind of resigned to the fact I would prefer to see a natural grass surface, but it is what it is. That said, I think we need to know, again, I think we need to know what we're getting into. I think we need to understand the risks. I think we need to be fully transparent about what it is that we're doing here with this new surface, what it takes to dispose of it, and what the potential problems are with it. So, and I think the town ought to have a pretty good shot at understanding those points before we proceed with this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, please go ahead, Jen.
I am the co-chair of the Climate Action Committee. Thank you. And at a meeting a couple of months ago, we did a vote on preference for natural grass rather than artificial turf. So that's one comment. The other comment is Marblehead seems to successfully use their grass field many more hours than the 250 you suggested. I will find the data and I will send it to people on the Recreation Committee. It's also organically managed, so it doesn't use pesticides. And all the other fields in Concord are organically managed, so don't use pesticides. The other concern that I have is to talk about responsible disposal of the fields, but a very significant amount of the field gets worn down and scattered and is microplastic pollution. The loss of the fibers of the grass, and also the crumb rubber, which Everybody knows, everybody who has a child who plays any sports finds it scattered around the houses and in the washing machine and everywhere else. But microplastic pollution is a serious problem.
Thank you. That's sort of the key players that we had wanted to get comments for. If anybody else would like to make comments, I'd ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes. Anybody would like to step up to the microphone and add an additional comments?
Dean Banfield again. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was incredibly informative. I'm an adult soccer player, been playing soccer my entire life, and I've played on every kind of surface that you can imagine. I always prefer grass. There's no question a soccer player always prefers a well-maintained grass field. There's just no question. However, we have lights up there. We run those fields extensively. I don't think they could support that level of play using grass. I just don't think so. I've played on plenty of grass fields that are worn out, so that's also a problem. They're not great. They have potholes. They're, right in front of the goal mouth. It's just dirt and gravel. So, I fully appreciate that we would probably be putting in a turf field. However, that being said, I'm going to just advocate for the Brockville, which he has refused to mention, which is the product which is ground up wood chips in some way. It's engineered wood. It's totally natural. It can then form some kind of amendment to soils or something at the end, and the recycling problem is nothing. I've played on that. It's over in Lexington. Anybody want to go play on the Lexington fields? They've been replacing it with Brockville for the last 2 or 3 years, and they're beautiful things. So thank you.
Thank you. We have Scott Richardson online. Sorry, and then we'll come back. Online, Scott.
Thank you. You can hear me, correct? Can you hear me?
No, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Hang on.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Now I think we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. I had just 2 thoughts. I would feel better if we really did know the nature of full cycle recycling of the product. And the presentation said that would be available 2025, 2026. So one simple question I had is, do we need to do this now, or can we wait a year with the idea that the end product of recycling might be better? It's a kind of a simple question. My broader thought is this. I think it's a very comprehensive presentation, but it would be more comprehensive and indeed more thorough and more consistent with our town's commitment to managing climate emissions if the study did a full cycle carbon emission analysis of replacing with new turf versus grass. And what I mean by that is accounting for the carbon emissions associated with producing the new product, installing that product, and then comparing that with the carbon emissions associated with mowing grass and et cetera. I think we are a sophisticated, educated, well-funded community, and that kind of thinking, I think, would add value to the process, would have us be fully informed, could be a model for other communities, and quite frankly, is consistent with our town's commitment to understanding carbon emissions and actually doing something about it. We may end up knowing that, all things considered, artificial turf is less carbon intensive than grass. I would like to know that. And if it's not the case, if it's 2 times more carbon intensive than natural turf, then I think we need to have a conversation as a town about how much longer we want to kick the can down the road on carbon emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, Wendy Ravelli, 42 Bow Street, member of the Select Board, but speaking for myself, maybe not.
I had two questions. One was, and I didn't get this, this could have been a clarifying question. Did I hear that by putting the pad in, it would elongate the life of the field? And would that elongation
That one you can
differ
answer.
based on the infill?
It can. I don't think we're talking a matter of years here. Oh, sorry. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. We're not necessarily talking a matter of additional years of life, but we do think, just generally speaking, when there's a pad beneath the turf, not only does it soften impact of players, but they're the cleats themselves. That system as a whole will absorb a little better, and therefore there's less point pressure on the turf carpet itself, therefore potentially increasing its life.
All right, I mean, I'm certainly in support of it. I think for safety reasons, I think it's a good idea. The second question was that we have to replenish the rubber fill today. Do we have to replenish the non-synthetic materials at the same rate?
Non-synthetic materials, depending on which one it is, typically will require replenishment far more frequently than chrome rubber does. Not full-scale replenishment like we're doing now after 16 years of being in, but depending on the material, those are natural products. They have a tendency to break down, and therefore, periodic additional infill will be required with some of those products. It varies, and there are a bunch of them. At the end of its useful life, the end of the life of the turf carpet itself, depending on the condition of that infill, it could either be reutilized or replaced in full.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is to this committee. How are you going to decide? I mean, I feel like we're going to do a synthetic field, and it makes a lot of business sense to do that. But how are you going to decide what infill, if you get to that point? Who and how will you decide that choice?
Ultimately, we're here to collect the information, and we can make a recommendation or forward comments to the town manager. Ultimately, it's the town manager, but she has put together a team of people with Public Works, Recreation Commission, the school department. CFO Anthony Ansaldi is heading that team, so there's a bunch of us discussing it. And I'm sure that the town manager, I'm not speaking on her behalf, but she would look to us to help her make that decision.
Okay,
But ultimately, that's where the decision lies.
Okay, and I guess my point is, will the public get a chance to comment once again on that choice when you get there? That's my question. That's it.
I think this is the prime opportunity to comment and let us know people's thoughts. I mean, at some point, a decision's going to have to be made.
But I hope there'll be some insight for public, because I just feel like there should be another opportunity, or at least some inkling of a recommendation and an opportunity for the public to comment. I mean, you're not here today to say that this is our recommendation, so I just feel like there's another opportunity that needs to be had for the public. That's it.
We'll certainly be as transparent. Transparency absolutely is a goal. No one wants to not be transparent.
Hi, Janet Rothrock, 618 in Ersnack Hill Road. I have a number of comments. I looked at different infills, and the biological infills like cork, wood, and so on, some people complain that they're harder than crumb rubber. Also, some of them float, so they might be okay in, like cork floats. Be great in Arizona. It might wander away in our climate. And I think Brockville has fungicides and PFAS, because if it didn't have any fungicides, it would simply compost or mold, or, In 2007, the original Doug White Field was installed, and the carpet was found to have lead in it, and we had to replace it about 2 years later. So Concord has an experience with accepting the manufacturer's comments, and I think we should demand independent testing. And when we do that, I think we ought to find out what level they're testing at. Now, I don't know how they test for lead in carpet, but I know in water, there are a couple pitfalls in testing water, because they'll test at the wrong level. You should test it parts per trillion, not parts per billion. So sometimes somebody will say, oh, that's, fine, it's, X number in parts per billion or something, but it's, it's not the right level. Also, there are about 5,000 to 10,000 different PFAS, so you have to know what you're testing for. I think in water they only test for about 8 normally, so I don't know what you'd be testing for, but perhaps somebody with more chemistry background than me can work on that one. Looking at you, Paul. Now, on the question of PFAS in the carpet, my understanding from what I've read is that in order to manufacture the carpet, liquid plastic is extruded through tiny metal apertures. And in order to come out of those apertures and not clog, it has to have PFAS in it. Otherwise, it wouldn't slip through, it would clog it. So my understanding is that no matter what the manufacturer says, they actually do have PFAS. So that's a fun thing to deal with. And then on disposal, I think in the future, it's probably going to be harder to dispose of a field than it is now. I think it was probably easier in the past than it is now, and it'll probably be harder in the future. Might be a good idea to chart how much it cost some years ago and how much it costs now, and extrapolate and figure out what it might cost in the future. And then when you're setting the usage fees for the new field, you could take that into account because this is a public-private partnership, and my feeling is that the town is at risk of being saddled with liability in the future. So I hope there's going to be adequate money saved, put away, for the probable need to dispose of this thing. They have been taking them to Pennsylvania, but I understand they won't take them anymore. They said they were going to put a plant in there, a Dutch plant, but there is no plant, I think, either in the Netherlands or in Pennsylvania. If you look at aerial photos, they've just stacked the stuff up in Pennsylvania, which I think now you have to send it down to Louisiana. And I don't know where you're going to have to send it in 15 years. So my concern is that you're saddling with the town with a problem. And I also think when the intergovernmental, was it the municipal intergovernmental agreement? Is that what it's called?
Sounds right.
Okay, well, we should all get familiar with it because it expires in 2032. And that is the agreement that governs the maintenance of the field.
Mm-hmm.
And if the town, the town's DPW takes care of it now, but when the agreement expires, my concern is that CCRSD may not want to take responsibility for it because it's a liability issue. And if I were Carlisle, I would say, Concord, you made a problem. I don't think I want to buy into that. Okay. So that's something we're going to have to deal with, and that's another reason to keep the usage fees, to jack them up enough to deal with whatever disposal issues you have. Okay? Okay? Because that will happen. The end of that intergovernmental agreement will happen during the time that field is in place, about halfway through its lifetime.
Thank you. That's a good comment. Thank you.
Eric Jarnwood, 61 Hubbard Street. I was actually involved, I am treasurer of Friends of CC Fields, and I was involved back in the original construction of the fields. And we did in fact have specifications that call for a lead-free product, and it was in fact the town that discovered that there was lead, some small amounts of lead in the product, and of course the replacement with a lead-free product. So I would actually call that a win, and not something that was something that we made a mistake and we need to learn something from. As far as the agreements are concerned, of course, we would not want to operate without an agreement going forward. We look at this as the first of will hopefully be many replacements to keep the material, the field safe and working for everybody. We do have a concern about costs. The per user fee that we assess our athlete can't get to the point where sports become unaffordable for the average family. And so obviously there needs to be a balance between what it is that we can and can't take on. That is something that we just need to be pragmatic about. And I just wanted to address the issue that we had a commenter talking about perhaps putting this off until 2025, 26, when hopefully at that point there might be a full recycling solution. The fields are pretty much at the end of their useful life, and there is something to consider as far as athlete safety and availability of the fields. And I think it needs to be put up against whatever marginal gain you might have from recycling versus repurposing. We don't see why repurposing isn't a perfectly good solution, as opposed to having to have it as be a recycling solution. So, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online, Anthony, or is there anybody else here who would like final comments?
Pamela Dritt. Where was the lead found? In the carpet itself or in the crumb rubber?
I don't know the answer to that question. We can find out.
There is no way ground up tires, which is what the crumb rubber is made of, is safe for children to play on with developing brains. We now have up to a half a teaspoon of microplastic inside our brains measured. Any addition of plastic to the environment for a little bit more time playing when you can actually play is not worth it. We can make ourselves here a toxic dump that we cannot get rid of because there is nowhere to put it. Just like you cannot export our plastic waste to China any longer. And it's not possible to recycle plastic. The only thing that is actually recyclable economically is glass and metal.
Thank you.
We need to also look at the new advances in turf, natural turf, that doesn't degrade, that stands up to all kinds of abuse. We don't need to limit ourselves just to get a little more time. And because there are many people like me that are willing to fund good environmental things instead of creating dead zones.
Thank you. That's 2 minutes if you can wrap up.
We could also work in a partnership together to get both playing solutions and ecologically good ones that don't add this extreme financial and health risk to our town. Remember how long we had lead paint was just fine. Remember how long we had asbestos was just fine. Remember that we only recently found out about PFAS, and I recommend you all watch the movie Dark Waters to find out how we discovered that.
Thank you.
Tracy Morano, speaking on behalf of the school committee. Myself for the school committee. I will bring it back to the school committee about 2032 because the intergovernmental agreement does end then, so it will be during the life of this turf field. And the school committee is always willing to collaborate with anyone that would like to fundraise for us, so we appreciate the work of the Friends of CC Fields because this is not something that we have in our budget right now, obviously, and that's really far out, but I will bring it back to the school committee for discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy.
I forgot to mention, you need a place to store the infill. You're going to need extra infill because it packs down, it kind of wanders away. And until very recently, just a couple of months ago, the crumb rubber infill, there were huge sacks of it, like this big, and they were leaking, and they degraded even more. I took photographs first time in February, I think. Janet Miller and I went over there, took a little walk around the back bleachers, and it was unsecured, and I think finally they took care of it some weeks ago or a couple months. But when the campus for the high school was finished by CC at Play, John Boynton promised an amenities building with food, toilets, and an outdoor fountain. That's what I was looking at the time, because I was working on putting about a dozen fountains in town. And that it didn't get built. We're dealing with that now. So, but they could have had, I brought the issue, or we brought the issue to the attention of Delia K, because it was like 2 inches from the 100-foot setback, wetlands setback. And it needs to be secured. It shouldn't be left to blow in the wind, float away in rain, or it actually looked like kids had taken broken bricks and just tossed them at it. So.
That's an important operations and maintenance question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Delia's comment was, you could have gotten a Reeds and Ferry wood shed for like $1,000, stuck the stuff in it, and it's all over the place still. It's a mess.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online? Great. I would like to thank all of you for participating. This is obviously an issue that people care deeply about. We all care about the environment and health and safety, and we all want to provide the greatest recreational opportunities for Concord residents that we can. I want to thank Kyle for that excellent presentation. That was very helpful. I think answered a lot of questions for people. We will have a transcript of this event available so that everyone can hear the comments, and we will go through that transcript and get back to the public with any of the questions we can answer that were specifically asked. We will endeavor to do so working with our consultants. And thank you all very much. Any other commissioners have anything else final to add? Great. Thank you all very much. We'll close the meeting of the Recreation Commission. Thank you all very much.